So with Mondays including our Marvel What If story, what I want to do here is I want to cover the story of the Incredible Hulk killing all the superheroes and becoming a Herald of Galactus. This is kind of like the worst case scenario for Earth, and it's actually a lot more complicated than it seems in terms of all the stuff that happens, meaning it's not like a linear series of events. There's all kinds of crazy stuff that goes on in the story. It's one of the reasons why I love it so much. But this story comes directly out of the World War Hulk storyline. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, and I know there's a lot of people out there that do, but for those of you guys who don't know, when it came to the World War Hulk story, this was basically just a way to remove the Incredible Hulk from the Marvel landscape prior to Civil War and then bring him back. And so what Marvel did is they basically had a group called the Illuminati, Charles Xavier, Black Bolt of the Inhumans, Name of the Submariner, Doctor Strange. They had the group come to the decision that the Incredible Hulk was just too unpredictable and violent to remain on Earth, and ended up sending him into space. The problem was he ended up traveling through a wormhole, more or less, ended up on the wrong side of the galaxy and landed on a place called Sakaar, which led into the Planet Hulk event, whereby he basically rallied together a whole bunch of revolutionary forces and was able to topple the existing king. The issue with this was that while those people who looked to the Incredible Hulk as the savior were in the midst of building a monument, the ship that he was sent on by the Illuminati was detonated accidentally and set off a thermonuclear blast. And in doing so, it basically killed the Incredible Hulk's new wife, their unborn child, or I guess their newborn child, and basically everybody that the Hulk knew on the new kingdom that he had settled for himself. And so because of this, he returned back to Earth with what he called his Warbound, his pact of people that he had come to view as allies during his time as a gladiator during the Planet Hulk storyline. And he basically cut a swath through the superhero community. Now, what this does is this shows us an alternate situation because this brings in the events of Secret Invasion. Now, Secret Invasion was another half of the Marvel storyline. That was a series of events whereby Marvel established that the Skrulls, who had the ability to shapeshift, had previously had their planet destroyed by Galactus, and they had looked to Earth as a new home for themselves in a manifest destiny kind of situation. And the result was that they had begun the process of replacing the various occupants, human and superhero alike on Earth, with Skrull replicants. The issue with this was that during this part of the story of World War Hulk, the Skrull Queen is basically Spider-Woman Jessica Drew. And so because of this, she's still on Earth, and the Skrulls are effectively just waiting out in space for her to give the signal for them to all show up and invade the planet Earth and basically kill off all the superheroes. But what happens here is that unlike the original World War Hulk event, with Reed Richards creating these satellites that would basically attack the Incredible Hulk and destroy him, because of the fact that the battle's going so badly, because Bruce Banner is literally just tearing all the superheroes apart piece by piece, it's really like a last-ditch effort. It's really just, just wipe everything out. Just, it's a scorched earth kind of policy. And so what happens is that at the request of Reed Richards, Tony Stark launches the satellites and annihilates everybody. And so the most powerful superheroes who are going against Bruce Banner are all annihilated in this destruction or in this conflict. And so what we do is we actually jump forward by a few months in the sense that the bishop, with the queen having been killed among all these heroes, her second in command, her bishop, who's kind of like this religious leader in the Skrull Empire, takes control of the Skrull fleet and begins invading the planet Earth. And so what we do is we switch to what seems to be a few months, and we end up joining with a recreated version of the Vision. And the Vision shows up and discovers that Bruce Banner is basically digging graves for everyone who died in New York, whether they were human, whether they were superhero. He's in the middle of building all this. Now, of course, Bruce Banner can't really survive the high level of radiation here, which is one of the other reasons why those survivors who weren't obliterated by the blast were almost immediately killed off by the radiation because it was so potent. But he finds that Bruce Banner's here and he basically begins talking with him, right? He's like, hey, look, man, we need you. Like, we basically need you here. Now, Bruce Banner doesn't want to have anything to do with this. He says, yes, I could survive in my Hulk form, but I'm basically dying. And this is Bruce Banner just kind of coming to terms with the destruction that he's experienced over the course of his life, all the destruction that he's basically created. And so it's him paying penance. So it's very similar to the Incredible Hulk Last Man on Earth storyline that we had previously covered. But what the Vision says is, look, man, like, this was not the end. Like, these superheroes, this wasn't the end. While you've been here in isolation in New York, the Skrulls invaded Earth and they almost immediately killed off the X-Men. Whatever superheroes were left were second tier at best. Wolverine was removed from the planet Earth because his healing factor made him immortal, so the only way to basically keep him from killing off the Skrulls in their entirety was to just take him away from Earth so they don't have to worry about him here. And the result is that there's only like a handful of us left. There's almost nobody left alive. We have Hank Pym, we have Janet Van Dyne, we have a couple others here and there, Cannonball Sam Guthrie, but they're really just scavengers, survivors, the ones who have been trying to make it day by day, and we're rallying them to our cause. And this is kind of the cool thing, is because he says, Janet Van Dyne is the one that brought brought them all together. Janet Van Dyne was the person that said, look, we need leadership here. Now, what most likely happened, this is kind of what we're left to figure out on our own devices anyway, what most likely happened behind the scenes was that Hank Pym really probably just had like a crisis of conscience. That's not new for his character. Hank Pym has emotional breakdowns all the time. He has emotional breakdowns with regards to his personalities. He has multiple breakdowns with regards to, you know, whether or not the Super Bowl is going the way that he wants it to. He has emotional breakdowns for everything. It's insane. And so because of this, Janet Van Dyne probably stepped up and really took the reins. And so what happens is we basically transition to a base in the Andrionics, I think is what it's called, Andriondax. And it's basically a section of the world whereby some heroes or some survivors, some humans are trying to take refuge, but they're being tracked down systematically by the Skrulls. And so while Hank Pym, while Sam Guthrie do what they can to rescue these people, they're suddenly met by the arrival of Bruce Banner, the Incredible Hulk. Now, what's also cool about this is that Bucky Barnes is alive. Now, this is during the time when Bucky Barnes, at least it seems as though he was underground. And so it, you know, for some reason or another, obviously probably the conflict with the Incredible Hulk brought him back. But whatever the case may be here, he's also one of the military guys who's kind of running the show. And we would expect that with Bucky Barnes. If Janet Van Dyne is the one who's in charge of everything, she would have to have generals, people who would basically go out and overwatch field missions. And because Bucky Barnes spends so much time fighting alongside Captain America, it makes perfect sense that he would be one of the people that would oversee this conflict. But when the Incredible Hulk arrives, Bucky Barnes initially finds it a little strange, because when they get back to an abandoned SHIELD bunker, most likely having belonged to Nick Fury and, you know, operating as a new base of the Avengers, when they get back there, you know, Bucky Barnes initially says, this is going to be strange. And the reason is because everybody doesn't like the Hulk. Like, a lot of people just hate him because he was the one that led to this in the first place. You know, the Incredible Hulk's rampage on the planet Earth, the fact that he cut a swath through so many different superheroes, basically set up the stage for the Skrulls to take advantage of a fractured Earth, and in doing so, conquer it. And so what happens is the Incredible Hulk actually turncoats and says, hey, look guys, you know, I'm here to try to save things. I'm here to fix things. You know, because of all the destruction that I've wrought, because of all the conflict that I've created, I'm here to try to atone for that and make up for my past mistakes. And so alongside, you know, Dagger, alongside, you know, Bucky Barnes, a whole horde of superheroes, they literally just start tearing through the Skrulls everywhere. I mean, they just start conquering cities, you know, they start conquering outposts, they start freeing all these different people. And so when it gets to the point whereby the Skrulls are starting to realize that the Incredible Hulk is working against them, and that with his unbridled strength, there's really nothing they can do to stop him, the Skrull Bishop says, it's time to enact our spy. He says, we have a spy among the ranks of these superheroes, and it's time to bring them out. Now, one of his generals says, well, why did you wait this long? You know, why did you wait so long? Like, we've lost hundreds of people. Why did you wait until just now to enact this spy and to bring them down? And this is actually really, really smart. The Bishop says, because I wanted all the heroes in one spot. Now, that's the smart thing, because, you know, the heroes were either in camps or they were hiding. Whatever the case may have been, not all of them were gathered together as part of the new Avengers. And so the Bishop said, look, the Incredible Hulk is a force of nature. If he allies himself with the Avengers, his strength will give other people strength. And as a result, they'll come out of hiding, they'll rally under the umbrella of his capabilities, and they'll literally, you know, create their own team, and they'll launch a war against us. And so he says, when they do that, then that will be when all the heroes come out, and that's when we strike. And so what we learn is that the Skrull replicant that's been a part of the Avengers this entire time was Janet Van Dyne. And Janet Van Dyne had been put there as that Skrull replacement since the beginning of the conflict, since, you know, almost immediately after, you know, the Incredible Hulk, or I guess immediately after the destruction of Tony Stark when it came to New York City. And so as a result, she says the Skrulls had basically analyzed the genome of Hank Pym, and they found that he was effectively unstable in terms of his molecular structure because of the Pym particles. And so she said what they could do is they could basically turn him into a genetic bomb. They could effectively detonate him on the molecular level, and they could let off a massive wave of destruction. And that's exactly what happens. With all the heroes being there in one place, they quite literally just detonate Hank Pym. And in doing so, it's this massive, you know, I guess what would amount to a nuclear explosion, and it annihilates every single hero who's there. And so in effect, the Incredible Hulk is the last man on Earth right now. I mean, all the humans who were rallied in the bunker of the new Avengers are dead. You know, all those existing humans are gone. All the superheroes that remained on Earth that were in this bunker are gone. And so because of this, the Incredible Hulk just wants to see the Earth destroyed. And so what happens is the Incredible Hulk recalls an instance whereby when he was on the Defenders alongside Silver Surfer and Doctor Strange, he recalls that they were informed by Reed Richards that there is a homing device, a beacon, in a pocket of the negative zone, some little small aspect of the negative zone. It can be accessed using, you know, whatever portals it was that existed in what was left of the Baxter Building, and the Incredible Hulk could access this beacon and use it to call the Silver Surfer. And so Silver Surfer arrives here, and when he does, the Incredible Hulk says, wipe out the Earth, call Galactus and have him consume the Earth. Now this is crazy because we've never really seen an instance where a superhero says, we want Galactus to wipe out the Earth. Of course, and again, a lot of that's because the superheroes don't want their Earth destroyed. But even in a lot of like the post-apocalyptic what-if scenarios, for example, the Incredible Hulk being the last man on Earth, when all the population of heroes and humans are wiped out in a global nuclear war, surely this was a scenario he could have called, and he could have just had Galactus consume the Earth and destroy him. But of course, that story needed to take a different tone, and it was written at a different point in time too. So it may just be that, for whatever reason, Reed Richards never told them about this homing beacon that would bring Galactus in. But the only time we've ever really seen an instance where something like this has happened was during Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four, when, Reed Richards realized that there was going to be a massive conflict of the planet Earth and summoned Galactus to fight on his behalf against the Mad Celestials. That was really the only time we've ever really seen that happen. And so the Incredible Hulk here is just unbridled rage. And so Silver Surfer says, okay, fine, because right now the Incredible Hulk will kill him. If the Silver Surfer doesn't do it, the Incredible Hulk will kill him, and that's entirely possible. The Hulk's durability, his strength, makes him, well beyond the Silver Surfer when it comes to just sheer force. Now, the Silver Surfer can do all kinds of crazy things too. He could probably break down the Hulk on a molecular level. He could wipe him out of existence. He could do a lot of different things. But when it comes to this moment right now with the Incredible Hulk's hands around the Silver Surfer's neck, he would kill him. He would literally just kill him on the spot. And so the Silver Surfer says, okay, fine. If you want your Earth destroyed, I'll destroy it. I'll have Galactus destroy it. You're the last human here, so you're really the only one that's in a fit place to judge what happens. And so the Silver Surfer says, not only will I bring Galactus here and have him consume the Earth, I'm leaving. I'm not going to be a herald of Galactus. This is the last straw. And so the Silver Surfer basically takes off. Now, of course, we follow up with this with Galactus arriving on Earth with his machine and basically destroying the Earth, which is kind of ironic because Galactus destroying the Skrull homeworld is the reason why the Skrulls showed up on Earth in the first place. And so it's really just history repeating itself. But following the destruction of this Earth, the destruction of the superheroes, all of which was led to by the actions of the Incredible Hulk, we end up having him met with Galactus, and Galactus says, look, my herald is gone. I have no one here to fight on my behalf. I have no one here to find these, find planets for me to consume. I am going to make you my new herald. I'm going to make you the guy who's going to be the one that goes out and finds these planets for me. Now, the problem with the Incredible Hulk is that for him, he wanted to die. He didn't want to, he wanted the Earth destroyed because he wanted to be destroyed with it. For him, his actions, his violence, his conflict, his destruction had led to the deaths of all the superheroes that he had ever known. It led to the death of all of humanity. And so for him, he wanted an end to the whole damn thing. He wanted the Skrulls destroyed because they killed superheroes and they took over the Earth. And then he wanted to die because he was the source of all the suffering that he had ever experienced in his life. But Galactus says, no. Not only that, I'm not going to make you live a new life remembering everything that had happened. I'm going to make you forget. I'm going to wipe your memory of everything that had ever happened. This is going to be a clean slate, and you are going to go forward as my herald in the universe with no realization of who you were before this moment. And that's exactly what happens. The Incredible Hulk becomes the herald of Galactus, and presumably goes about the world, doing whatever it is that or going about the universe doing whatever it is that he does. As far as I know, there's no follow-up series to this. This is it. Which, if there was a follow-up series, and if there is, somebody post a comment and let me know, because I want to make videos on that. I want to make videos on the Incredible Hulk as a herald of Galactus. That would be so beast. Like, post a comment. Like, if you guys would want to see something like that, post a comment. If it exists, I'll make a video on, the first story arc or something like that. But yeah. So anyway, that's the story. The Incredible Hulk becoming a herald of Galactus. His entire life led to the destruction of all the superheroes, not to mention his violence and rage. And with everything dead, with all humans and all superheroes dead, Galactus just makes him his herald. So if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the subscribe button. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think, and I will catch you all later. Peace. Here's a crazy thing. Where I say that I've been reading Marvel Comics for, 20-something years, a huge bulk of that has been the X-Men. I mean, I always loved the X-Men. They were just my favorite team. Like, they were one of my favorite groups, really, that existed in Marvel Comics. I read other stuff just out of curiosity about what it was about, but like the meat and potatoes of most of my knowledge when it comes to Marvel Comics is the X-Men. And this story is amazing. It's sad, but it's really, really amazing. So, the Juggernaut, of course, is one of the more popular foes of the X-Men. I mean, in a lot of ways, I would argue he's more of the arch nemesis nemesis of Charles Xavier and by extension the X-Men, but Magneto is still probably the most popular villain. When people think of like the main enemy of the X-Men, they think of Magneto, and rightfully so. I mean, he was the first major villain they faced. But with regards to Juggernaut, he's always been this sort of wrecking ball. He's not very smart, but his history with his stepbrother, Charles Xavier, created a lot of animosity between the two. And so because of the fact that they bickered and they argued and Kane Marco hated Charles, once he became the Juggernaut, during the Korean War, when he picked up the Crimson Gem of Sidorak, and, we got that whole transcription, whosoever touches this gem shall receive the power of the Crimson Bands of Sidorak, or whatever it is. Henceforth, you who read these words shall go forevermore a human Juggernaut. Something along those lines, I'm paraphrasing. But the fact remains, once he became the Juggernaut, he was like this unstoppable force. And it was kind of cool, because in Marvel Comics, the Juggernaut literally lives up to his words in almost every conceivable way. There was, for example, a time where the Incredible Hulk defeated the Juggernaut, didn't really defeat him, but managed to push him back, which was supposed to be impossible. But it took the Incredible Hulk modified with celestial technology at the hands of Apocalypse in order to make that happen. Again, that all goes into the nature of the fact that Sidorak is one of these old demonic entities that exists in Marvel Comics. It's a wildly powerful being, but in terms of the Juggernaut, he's an avatar, as if Sidorak were walking around the world. Now, Juggernaut's not nearly as powerful as Sidorak, but it's still kind of cool, because what this story does is it basically comes after the events of X-Men number 11 back in 1965, written by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Now, the idea behind X-Men number 11 is that it basically introduced, at least I'm pretty sure it introduced, the character of the Stranger. And the Stranger is just one of those cosmic entities that exists out there, and he's literally called the Stranger because nothing's known about him. He's just a being who's there. He's got cosmic powers, and that's really about it. But in that story, the Stranger had shown up on Earth and basically kidnapped Magneto and the Toad and whisked them off to his own planet just to explore and, just study them. And so it was kind of cool in terms of how that little bit worked. But what this story does is it takes place in the interim when Magneto is off planet alongside Toad. And it initially opens up with this bit of an explanation. All the Avengers are dead. Thor's dead. Iron Man's dead. Captain America's dead. And standing over them all is the Juggernaut. Now, the initial indication here is that the Juggernaut's the one that did them all in. But then we end up finding out that it was actually the Sentinels that basically killed off all these different superheroes. And it's kind of cool when we get to see like Juggernaut versus the Sentinels, because one thing to keep in mind is that different writers interpret the powers of characters differently, and it's all contextual and based on what story they want to tell. For example, in this story, Juggernaut rips through these Sentinels. I mean, it's no challenge at all. I mean, he's got super strength. He's virtually unstoppable once he starts moving. He's nigh indestructible. One of them makes a comment. They have like less than 1% of a chance to actually survive the experience, like 1/10,000th or 1/100,000th of a percent in surviving the experience. And so it's kind of cool because where they try to take off, Juggernaut grabs him, basically kind of drags him back down and completely and totally pummels him. But if we go and read a story like Days of Future Past, that was a story Chris Claremont wrote, an Uncanny X-Men 141 and 142, I think it was, and it was basically the worst case scenario. It was an answer to the question, what would happen if mutants failed? If Xavier was killed and Senator Robert Kelly was killed, what would happen if they were assassinated by mutants? And what would happen if humanity responded by jump-starting the Sentinel program and the Sentinels went awry? It was a doomsday scenario. It was the worst case situation for Earth and more for the mutants than anything else because they failed in their entirety. And so the Days of Future Past led to the Sentinels more or less modifying their own programming, becoming autonomous, and then just wiping out the entirety of humanity, mutants and otherwise, and that was really about it. I mean, you had a few little, rebel factions here and there, and of course that led into, Rachel Summers, the daughter of Jean Grey and Cyclops from Days of Future Past, sending the mind of Kitty Pryde into the past to stop the whole thing from happening. But still, the idea was that, Sentinels had basically conquered Earth. And so when you go and you read that story, Juggernaut's long since been dead. He was eradicated by the Sentinels, and consolidating those two things is kind of difficult because if his power has basically always been the same, if for the most part, up until 8th Day, up until Tryon, his powers were basically consistent across the board, then how do you justify those two things? And there's really no way that you can. You just kind of have to roll with the punches and just say, hey, look, it's just the way it goes. Different writers want to tell different stories. But the cool thing about this is that Juggernaut gives us a lot of inner monologue in terms of how he views things, in the sense that the Juggernaut was always very selfishly motivated in a lot of ways. I mean, he had a few friends here and there, like Black Tom Cassidy, for example, who for the most part resided in Cassidy Keep. But for the most part, Juggernaut was largely just kind of a lone wolf out there by himself, doing whatever it is that he wanted to do because he could. He was more or less a bully who received these almost godlike powers in terms of strength, durability, speed, movement, different things like that. And so as a result, with him basically losing everybody, believing that everybody out there is completely and totally dead, he actually goes back to the Xavier Institute. And this is very human of Kane Marco. I mean, he is human in and of himself. He just has incredible powers by way of the gem, but he almost seems inhuman in terms of how he acts. No one can stop the Juggernaut. He's this unstoppable force. He doesn't seem to be human. But then when he shows up here, he basically has this sort of connection with Charles Xavier, where his argument is, yes, I hated them. Yes, I hated the X-Men. Yes, I hated Charles Xavier, but I would do anything thing to be able to talk to them again because I am just so absolutely lonely. He misses his connection with humanity because it's the one thing that he never really seemed to have before, you know? And so because of this, what he ends up doing is he basically ends up walking the earth for like days and weeks and years. Time just passes. It just sort of blurs together. And all he can do is just travel around the world and look at all these different shambles, bits and pieces, these relics of humanity. And so, you know, finally he comes across this old Sentinel base that he'd long since destroyed. And the Sentinels begin coming to life, only for us to realize they're being controlled by Magneto. And so this is cool because this is how this feeds in to X-Men issue number 11. In X-Men issue number 11, in that story written in 1965, Magneto managed to finally get out, you know, managed to basically make his way back to Earth. In this story, events unfolded almost the exact same way in the sense that Magneto is being studied by the Stranger, but he also gained access to a lot of the different devices that the Stranger had. As a cosmic entity, he's come across all different manner of devices from different alien races, things he's made on his own, and what these things allowed Magneto to do was basically look at the Earth and see what was going on. And what we end up finding out here is that when the Sentinels began their campaign and they started going around and killing all these different superheroes, that from Magneto's perspective, Juggernaut just kind of watched it all unfold. He just basically stood back and watched it all happen. While Juggernaut didn't necessarily kill the Avengers or the X-Men himself, his inaction allowed it to happen. But then we get like this massive revelation. What we end up finding out is that somewhere along the line, when Juggernaut presumably first, you know, became a major villain for the X-Men, he showed up at the Xavier Institute and he basically killed all the X-Men. Not only that, you know, when he killed the X-Men, when he killed Charles Xavier, the whole 9 yards, when the Sentinel program was reinitiated, when it all jump-started again, there was nobody there to warn the Avengers, to warn the Fantastic Four. The Sentinels just kind of popped up out of nowhere. And where the X-Men have consistently fought the Sentinels, and where the X-Men are best suited to defeat the Sentinels because of their knowledge about the Sentinels' design, the X-Men weren't there because Juggernaut killed them. And so because of that, there was no one left to defend humanity. There was nobody left there to save humans. And so as the Sentinels began going through and wiping out humans, what Sentinels began to realize is that humans do procreate at a ridiculous rate. And so because of that, it would basically take too long, and the Earth would be almost eradicated in its entirety, virtually uninhabitable if the campaign went on. And so what they ended up doing was, in an effort to basically eliminate as many humans as possible, they basically modified their own cells to emit a kind of radiation. And so the Earth itself is just blanketed in all this radiation, and that's what killed all the humans. That's what killed everybody. It was basically the Juggernaut who killed the X-Men, which led to the deaths of almost everything in existence. But the reason why I say almost is because in the Juggernaut's rage at this revelation, the fact that he's the one that basically led to everything coming to an end, he starts freaking out, stomping on the ground, only to fall down into this cavern and discover the Iceman Bobby Drake. Now, this is kind of cool in terms of how this feeds on Iceman's history. Historically speaking, Bobby Drake has always been a little bit reckless and a little bit just sort of headstrong and more of the jokester than anything else. He's very much indicative of like your stereotypical teenager, you know, and because of that, he never really applied himself the way that he needed to. Now, that also went into the idea of why it is that Bobby Drake was so popular, but with him failing to basically focus and harness his abilities the way that he should, because this is relatively early in the days of the X-Men, this meant that once Charles Xavier died, there was no one there to teach Bobby Drake how to use his powers. And so for the most part, he can't control his abilities. And in this instance, you know, where he says, I can only maintain this current form for a few moments at a time, the amount of time that he maintains it goes on too long, and he basically encases himself in ice, and he can't get out. He can't shut his powers down. But because of the fact that Bobby Drake had basically made reference to the fact that there are people here, Juggernaut, in his desire to see more of humanity and his desire to experience a connection, smashes through Bobby Drake and then smashes through the door. And of course, when he shows up, we end up finding out that characters like Quicksilver are alive, Scarlet Witch is alive, Toad, who's basically sort of this jokey henchman of Magneto, are alive. And there's a few other mutants here and there, but there's also a lot of people. And that's kind of the irony of all this, because what Toad tells us is that when Magneto came back to Earth and realized the Sentinels were basically running amok, they were wiping out humanity in the process, wiping out whatever mutants were left, basically killing everything they could find, Magneto and Toad grabbed as many people as they could, human or mutant, threw them into their ship, and then whisked them off to this location to basically create a safe haven of sorts. And so with this radiation spreading throughout the world, they effectively created a bunker that protected them from it. But the irony is that with Juggernaut showing up and Juggernaut smashing down the door in his effort to experience and to talk to more people, he doomed them all to death. He's basically doomed the last remnants of humanity and mutants to die at the hands of this toxic radiation because he wanted to see them so badly. And that goes into the nature of the Juggernaut, right? I mean, he leaps before he looks. You know, he doesn't think about what's actually happened. He just does things, and then whatever happens, happens. And so despite the fact that he was longing for a connection, that he actually broke into this place intending no ill will, he dooms what's left of humanity. He basically killed everybody on Earth. And so it's kind of cool, because in this scenario, he's basically forced to just sort of walk off, live, just kind of exist, because he doesn't need food, he doesn't need water. He's effectively immortal so long as he's in possession of the Crimson Gem. The Juggernaut is the last man on Earth. That's it. There's no one left. The last vestiges, the last little tidbits of whoever was alive were in that bunker, and they're all dying now. I mean, they've got minutes. And so because of that, he's just doomed to walk the Earth forever until the Earth's destruction, or it's repopulated, or whatever the case may be. And so again, it's pretty dark and it's pretty messed up. To me, it's one of the coolest Juggernaut stories that's out there. So with that being said, guys, we're gonna go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace. So continuing our videos on Marvel's What If series, with Doctor Strange right around the corner, what I wanted to do here is dip my toe in the water and have a discussion about what would have happened if Doctor Doom became Doctor Strange. Now, a couple things to bear in mind here. For those of you guys who are new to Marvel Comics and new to my channel, the What If line of stories are publications designed to offer us alternate reality depictions of events. That is to say, in this instance, Doctor Doom becoming Doctor Strange instead of Stephen Strange. In addition to this story was written by Dan Slott, and so like all Dan Slott stories, it makes sense in the beginning, and then it goes off the rails about halfway through. And I don't know what was going on with Dan Slott when he wrote this, if he was just relatively new. I feel like he was, but he went completely off the reservation about halfway through this story. But what we do here is we pick up with Doctor Doom encountering the Ancient One for the very first time. Now, this is actually really kind of cool, because this ties directly into the history of Doctor Doom. And what I mean is, for those of you guys who have seen my series on the Books of Doom, we talked about his life as a child, that he had witnessed his mother's murder, that he had witnessed his father's murder, that he had basically gone to North America because of his vast intelligence. He was inducted into New York State University, where he met Reed Richards, but his mother's soul had been captured by Mephisto due to the fact that she had invoked a pact with the Prince of Lies, I guess, or with the demon, for the purpose of granting her the abilities related to black magic. And the result of this was that her soul was doomed forever to remain in the clutches of Mephisto. And Doctor Doom himself had basically spent as much of his life as he could trying to find ways to free his mother's soul. Now, after creating a teleporter that allowed him to travel to the Netherrealm in an attempt to save his mother's life, in the process, he had basically destroyed his face. And the result was that in an attempt to pursue a cure for this, as well as gain the power necessary to free his mother's soul, instead of traveling to the Himalayas and stumbling upon a temple of monks, he instead had traveled to Tibet, and he had stumbled upon the temple of the Ancient One with regards to the original Sorcerer Supreme. And so because of this, when the Ancient One had basically asked Doctor Doom what it was that he was there for, the Ancient One also purged, or I guess scanned the mind and the heart and soul of Doctor Doom, and discovered that he was basically looking for power, that he wasn't really looking to make the world a better place. He wasn't really looking to operate outside of himself in terms of being altruistic. Instead, he just wanted to amass power. And the result was that the Ancient One was actually pretty hesitant to help Doctor Doom, but the Ancient One also realized that there was a flicker of, greatness in Victor Von Doom. And the Ancient One believed that he could turn that flicker into a full-on flame and make Doctor Doom somebody spectacular. And so what happened was he basically took Victor under his wing and began teaching him everything he knew. The problem with this was that for Baron Mordo, at that point in time, the protege of the Ancient One, he viewed Doctor Doom as a threat simply because of the fact that Doom was able to learn in days what it took Baron Mordo to learn in weeks and months. And so because of this, Victor is wildly more powerful than Baron Mordo. Now, much like the main Marvel timeline where Stephen Strange and Baron Mordo had formed a rivalry of sorts, Baron Mordo also tries to attack Victor Von Doom. But what happens is that when he sees his face, he actually discovers that it is a Doom bot. Now, Dan Slott does not square this circle. For those of you guys who don't know, Victor Von Doom did not start creating Doom bots really until after he became Victor Von Doom, or at least Doom bots as we knew them when he was at New York State University. And what I mean here is that while Doctor Doom was creating Doom Doombots while he was at Empire State University. The issue is that we're not told how this Doombot got here. We're not told how it managed to make its way in here with no one knowing. Maybe he teleported it, whatever the case may be, but the fact remains that this Doombot also housed within it a small tube. And within this tube is basically a bomb on the subatomic scale that Dr. Doom plants in the brain of Baron Mordo, basically stating that if Baron Mordo kills Dr. Doom, or if Dr. Doom feels as though he's being betrayed, he can activate the device and it'll kill Baron Mordo. And so one of the interesting things about this is the Ancient One initially appears to Victor Von Doom after he makes this threat and doesn't realize that Victor Von Doom was telling the truth. Instead, the Ancient One thinks he's bluffing. The Ancient One thinks that he's basically lying. And so what happens is, shortly after this, Dr. Doom comes to the realization that the Ancient One could easily be toppled because, you know, this guy does not realize the advancement of technology in relation to what Doom is capable of. Now, following this particular plan that Doom begins to lay in motion, we ultimately pick up with the arrival of Stephen Strange. Now, the arrival of Stephen Strange happens exactly the way it did in Marvel Comics, and this is interesting because Victor Von Doom, his timeline started before Stephen Strange. That is to say, Doom was at school with Reed Richards. Doom experienced his face being scarred before Stephen Strange experienced his car wreck, which resulted in him traveling to the Temple of the Ancient One and looking for a cure, you know, to basically restore his ability to use his hands and become a surgeon again. But because of the fact that Doom is a student of the Ancient One, when Stephen Strange arrives here, he's basically met with Victor Von Doom. And when Stephen Strange says that his whole purpose for being here is to find a cure so that he can continue to use his hands and to be a neurosurgeon, instead of allowing him to become a part of the mystic arts, Victor Von Doom actually removes, man, this is messed up, he removes his hands and replaces them with robotic hands, basically allowing Stephen Strange to go forward, able to engage in the kind of surgery that he's used to with better precision than he was able to do with his normal hands. That's messed up. I'm just gonna throw it out there. That's kind of messed up. It's funny, like it's funny to me. I don't know why, but that's kind of messed up. But the fact remains here that because the Ancient One realizes that Dr. Doom didn't help Stephen Strange when he could have, the Ancient One comes to the conclusion that Doom is not the protege he was looking for. And so the idea of the Ancient One is to basically shoo Dr. Doom out of there as fast as possible, to more or less help him rescue his mother's soul and then get him away from the temple as fast as he can. And so what happens is the Ancient One I love this. The Ancient One presents Dr. Doom with the Eye of Agamotto and the Cloak of Levitation, but when he meets him, when Dr. Doom has his ironclad suit on, the Ancient One just kind of freaks out. He's totally surprised by what he sees because it's crazy, and it is. This is why I love Dr. Doom. You know, he's like, it is I. Like, it is, I don't know why that's funny to me, but it is. But the fact remains that Dr. Doom and the Ancient One travel to the Netherrealm in order to confront Mephisto. Now, because of the fact that Dr. Doom has the abilities of the Sorcerer Supreme, he's wildly powerful, but he's not as powerful as Mephisto. Something to keep in mind here is that in Marvel Comics, Mephisto is, for all intents and purposes, a cosmic entity. I mean, he's an elder god, but he's largely considered to be a cosmic entity because he's so powerful. He literally uses the energies of the souls that belong to people that he's tricked to power himself. And the reason for this is that it keeps him at his absolute peak in terms of his abilities when he's in the Netherrealm. Now, when he leaves the Netherrealm, he becomes weaker the longer he stays away. But the fact remains here that when Dr. Doom arrives alongside the Ancient One, he immediately sees that his mother is still being held captive and races off to help her. And because of this, Mephisto sees the two of them as being stronger together than they are apart. And as a result of their separation, he turns his sights to the Ancient One. Now, what follows is really just a mishmash of insanity of the highest level. This is probably some of the craziest writing that I've ever seen in my life, and I have no idea where Dan Slott went with this. So what happens here is the Ancient One initially is able to take on the forces of Mephisto. But the issue is that Mephisto, because of his extreme power, is able to overcome the Ancient One and actually kills him. And because of this, the Demon Lord Dormammu sees this as a chance to begin his invasion of Earth, due to the fact that Dormammu was always held at bay by the power of the Ancient One. Now, when it comes to Dormammu, something to bear in mind here is that Stephen Strange himself has admitted that if Dormammu were to rise to full power and invade the planet Earth, there'd probably be nothing anybody could do to stop him, just because Dormammu is so wildly powerful. I feel like he's a character we need to have a discussion on at some point closer to the release of Doctor Strange, just because I really hope the movie has a a nod to him or a tease to him, because Dormammu is, he is a villain of the highest order. I mean, he's wildly powerful. He's well beyond Galactus, some of the cosmic entities. It's insane how powerful he is. But the fact remains that the Ancient One, after having been killed, so to speak, by Mephisto, reemerges as, I guess, in his spirit form. And because he's in a spirit form, his power is at his peak, but he can't really interact directly with Mephisto. Instead, he basically uses his power to move on to the afterlife while simultaneously rescuing the soul of Doctor Doom's mother, thereby allowing Doctor Doom himself to step into the realm of being the Ancient One. And so because of this, he basically leaves Mephisto behind in the Netherrealm, travels back to the planet Earth, only to find that Dormammu has begun the process of invading the planet Earth. And so what happens is Doctor Doom travels, God in heaven, Dan Slott, Doctor Doom travels to meet the Fantastic Four. Now again, this all kind of coincides, right, with the current timeline of Doctor Doom in Marvel Comics during this point in its publication history anyway. It's just things are happening differently. And so instead of encountering the Fantastic Four after he became Doctor Doom and took over Latveria, instead he's re-encountering the Fantastic Four after having become the Sorcerer Supreme. In addition to this, Dan Slott actually does a pretty good job maintaining the essence of who the Fantastic Four are, in the sense that, of course, Doctor Doom shows up and says that he could just wipe them all out if he wanted to, but the issue is he needs Reed Richards' help, because Reed Richards is the second smartest person according to Doctor Doom, and the idea is that he needs an artifact of that's long since been lost in order to successfully defeat Dormammu. And so what he does is he teleports the Fantastic Four into the past and has them disguised as pirates. And the idea is to have the Fantastic Four board a ship that currently houses the Obsidian Stone of Merlin, which can be used to defeat Dormammu. That is the idea that Dan Slott came up with. And people wonder why Spider-Man's being written so bad at the moment. But the fact remains here that Doctor Doom and the Fantastic Four are successfully able to work together, in the sense that the Fantastic Four are able to grasp the Obsidian Stone, which is specially attuned for magical properties, which of course, Doctor Doom can in turn enhance and then take on the forces of Dormammu, which he's successfully able to do. And the result of this is that Dormammu is effectively cast back into the Dark Dimension, and Earth is freed of his control. The problem with this is that, Doctor Doom seems to succumb to the power of the Obsidian Stone, in the sense that it drains the souls of its wielder, and the result of this is that Doctor Doom seems to be dead or on the verge of dying. Now, while he is taken over to Stephen Strange for the purpose of Strange using his surgical skills in order to try to save the life of Victor Von Doom, it doesn't seem as if it's possible, and it seems as if Victor Von Doom is dying. But what happens is Doom says that he had planned for this, and the reason why was that when he first encountered Stephen Strange, he sensed that Strange had the potential for incredible magical abilities. And so what he did is he created a safeguard. He created a machine that would allow him to continue his legacy. And what he does is he basically has the mind of Stephen Strange removed, or at least has his memories removed, and overridden with the memories of Victor Von Doom, basically allowing Doom to switch bodies between who he was and the body of Stephen Strange. I don't know if that makes any sense to you guys. I'll be honest, man, this story's batshit crazy. This story's insane. This is, wow. I mean, it's fun, it's fun. It's a fun, it's a story I enjoyed. It is just, it's a what if story. We'll leave it at that. Anyway, guys, if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button, and make sure you guys become part of the Rob Corps. Make sure you guys drop a like if you enjoyed this video, and leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. Was Dan Slott on something when he wrote this story? But yeah, so with that being said, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Good God, and I will catch you all later. Peace. All right, there is a story. There's a story where Deadpool becomes Venom. Now, this story is written by Rick Remender, and it is a descent into absolute madness. Partly because of the fact that on his mask, Deadpool's wearing a mustache. I don't know how that works, but apparently it does. Now, this story also picks up in 1985. Now, the kicker about all this is that this treats Secret Wars 2 as if it never really ended, right? I mean, when Jim Shooter wrote Secret Wars 1, and it was just this mysterious being called the Beyonder that took all of the villains and all the heroes, and it put them on Battle World, and it made them fight each other. You know, when this story first popped up in 1984, it was all the rage. It was like, yeah, this is crazy, this is awesome, you know. It was meant to be a one-off, but because of its popularity, Marvel launched Secret Wars #2, which basically gave expansion on the Beyonder. The Beyonder, you know, was curious about humanity, showed up on Earth, and looked like John Travolta from Saturday Night Fever. So what ended up happening is, in this story, the Beyonder never left. The Beyonder was never defeated by the Molecule Man, Owen Reese. Instead, the Beyonder was messing around with people. Now, Deadpool is contracted by Galactus, and the reason why he's contracted by Galactus is because the Beyonder merged MODOK with the butt of Galactus. I don't know I don't know how else to say that. Like, I don't know how else to to say that to you guys. But the idea here is that Galactus basically contracts, or at least he gives Deadpool the retcon expungifier and says your job is to go after the Beyonder and basically use the retcon expungifier to annihilate him from existence. Now, of course, we know the expungifier is basically like a stand-in for the ultimate nullifier, right? Like the ultimate nullifier can obliterate things from existence. Well, the retcon expungifier removes things from continuity. So it basically, it treats the Beyonder like he never existed, is essentially what happens. The problem with this is that when Deadpool finds the Beyonder, he's just totally enamored by, his Jerry curls. Apparently his Jerry curls are absolutely incredible. And because of that, Deadpool can't let it go. Not only that, for some reason or another, Deadpool has Jerry curl now, which is weird. But the funny thing about this too is apparently the Beyonder took Billy Ocean and made him his limo driver. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, Billy Ocean was the guy who did the Caribbean Queen song. You know, now we're sharing the same dream. You know, like he's the one that did that song. And apparently the Beyonder loved it so much that he made Billy Ocean his driver. But there's also another reason why he brought in Billy Ocean. The reason for this is, keep in mind, this basically treats the events of Secret Wars like they actually happened, in the sense that Peter Parker eventually came across the Venom symbiote not knowing what it was, thinking it was a suit. It bonded to Peter Parker and he came back to Earth with his new costume. Of course, being a superhero, he immediately attacks the Beyonder and of course is like, look, you know, you made me who I am. You basically made me this Venom character. But then we realize the other reason why Billy Ocean is here is that in addition to being one of the most famous singers of all times, he is he's very good at killing people. And what he basically does, this is God, Rick Remender, man. Rick Remender writes this line where he says, "Hey, Spider-Man, get into my dreams and out of my car." Now, this is basically a flip on the phrase on the song that Billy Ocean did, where he's like, you know, get out of my dreams and into my bed. Like, that's basically, that's the song that they're playing on. God, I love this, dude. I love this story. The crazy thing about this, though, with regards to Deadpool becoming Venom, because of the fact that Peter Parker is basically blasted with the, you know, this weapon, whatever it is that Billy Ocean's using, that the singer Billy Ocean's using, the Venom symbiote's cast off of Peter Parker. And in response, it merges itself to Deadpool. Now, at this point, we basically pick up, like we literally just jump forward to 1993. And the Beyonder's been living like this wild life, this ridiculously fun life, but the novelties wore off. Not only that, and man, dude, Rick Remender's cold-blooded in this one. Not only that, Tony Stark is a full-blown alcoholic. Like his whole alcoholism has gotten the best of him. And there is, God, Rick Remender, there is this really messed up line where Deadpool's like, what happened to the retcon expungifier? You know, whatever happened to that? Because I still have to kill the Beyonder. And Tony Stark says, we pawned it. We pawned it with the rest of my Iron Man suit. And then he says he kept the glove. He's still Iron Man. He's still in control. This is kind of offensive, to be honest, to alcohol. Like, I've known alcoholics. It's kind of offensive to alcoholics, but it's also Tony Stark and it's a Deadpool comic. So it's, I guess, take it for what it's worth. But what ends up happening here is Deadpool basically says, okay, fine. You know, if we don't have the retcon expungifier, then I'm basically going to be a good guy. And so what he does is he basically sells, he sells Tony Stark to Advanced Idea Mechanics. He literally sells Tony Stark. And I guess they're going to take his brain or they're going to do whatever it is they do. I don't think we ever find out. But from here, he basically goes on this trip to try to become a superhero by joining different groups. Of course, he goes to the Fantastic Four, and Reed Richards says, we do not hire curly-haired people, which of course is one of the most severe instances of discrimination that I've ever seen. He goes to the Avengers mansion and Jarvis chases him off with a broom, and then he goes to the Defenders. God, the Defenders suck. He goes to the Defenders, and the Defenders are desperate. They're like, you ring the doorbell of the Defenders? We're hiring, please. And he's like, nope. He doesn't even want to work with the Defenders. No one likes the Defenders. That's messed up. Now that's old school Defenders. I'm pretty sure the new Marvel Now 2.0 Defenders will be pretty amazing. But in the end, like Deadpool looks around and basically says the reason why he's not able to find gainful employment is because of the fact that the Venom symbiote exists in the form of Jerry curl on his head. Now this is God, this is ridiculous. This is when Rick Remender, well, if the comic hadn't gone off the rails before, it goes off the rails now. Like, this is when Rick Remender really just kind of loses it. And the reason why is because, it seems like Deadpool does not have the Venom symbiote, but he still has the powers of Spider-Man. I don't know how. I don't know how that works, but it does. And so what he says is, okay, look, if no one's going to take me on as a superhero, then I'm going to be my own superhero. And he essentially just goes around killing people. Like, that's what he does. He just kills criminals everywhere that he finds them. Not only that, we find out that the Beyonder has basically reinvigorated the Battle World concept in the sense that instead of like traditional superheroes, fighting against crime, instead they're all basically just fighting against each other in this giant battle royale. Now, when Deadpool gets there, Rick Remender starts making fun of comic book fans. He makes fun of you, he makes fun of me, like he makes fun of comic book fans. There's this guy, I guess he's super something, I don't know, the Sentry or something like that, but there's this guy that appears to Deadpool and basically says, you look ridiculous in that costume. That guy over there is wearing an American flag and he's got an American flag discus. That guy is an iconic hero. And then the response of Deadpool is like, hey, look, man, I mean, that doesn't really matter. I mean, the suit doesn't really matter. You have like that guy over there who's basically Moon Knight, he's just as good as Captain America or something along those lines. But then like this weird superhero just like freaks out. And this is when Rick Remender starts making fun of fans because he's like, you do not take superheroes on the street and put them on teams with big superheroes. Street superheroes stay in their place. Big team superheroes stay in their place. You can't allow things to mix because if you allow things to mix, then it makes it different, and things that are different are weird, and I don't understand it, and I get confused, and I don't like it. And it's it's him making fun of comic book fans, basically saying comic book fans don't like change. Like comic book fans are scared of change because it puts them in a position where they're not comfortable. As a comic book fan, I don't consider that to be the case, but I think it's also pretty funny. Like it's pretty hilarious. But the fact remains here that we basically pick up, we pick up with Jerry Springer. This comic is insane. We pick up with Jerry Springer, and apparently we have Deadpool, we have some chick with the Venom symbiote hair now, with the Jerry curl, and then we have the Beyonder. And they're here because of the fact that this girl who's calling herself the Carnage Girl is with the Beyonder, and Deadpool's upset about it. Deadpool's angry just because of the fact that this girl caused him so much hassle. The reason why was because Deadpool's goal was to invite the Beyonder over to his house for a grand gala, and the goal was to just basically kill the Beyonder. The issue with this is that the Beyonder brought his ex-girlfriend, brought Deadpool's ex-girlfriend with him, and his ex-girlfriend, apparently Carnage Girl, was just like this crazy chick that like burned his house down, that like dropped a deuce in his home. I mean, it was it was really messed up. But in the end, like she basically says, look, I'm with the Beyonder now. You have to show me some respect. And when Deadpool's like, why? She says, because I'm pregnant. Now, the reason why this is ridiculous is because if you guys ever watched Jerry Springer back in the day, it was like the big, huge drop. It was like, man, like, this guy's been cheating on me or something like that, or this girl's been cheating on me, or it's just like some ridiculous situation. And then like the mic drop moment is like, I'm pregnant. And it's just, it's like, oh my God. Well, then we find out that apparently the Beyonder is not the father of this child. The father of this child is Galactus. The plot thickens. Galactus fathered, like he basically slept with Beyonder's girlfriend in order to get his revenge on the Beyonder, merging MODOK with his butt. And so because of this, the two of them just get into a massive fight and the Earth is destroyed. Now, from here, Rick Remender's like, whatever, hashtag logic, we end up picking up with Deadpool having saved the world. And the reason why is because in the fight between Galactus and the Beyonder, Deadpool was just like, all right, you guys are losing your minds. You guys are way too powerful to be fighting like this. You're gonna wipe everything out of existence. He used the retcon expungifier to obliterate them from continuity. And so the world celebrated Deadpool. They were like, yeah, Deadpool saved the world. Deadpool's amazing. Well, the problem with this is that in the mind of Deadpool, he's been seeking admiration this entire time. He's been seeking people to look at him and believe that he is the best superhero, the greatest of all the superheroes. The issue with this is that you still have superheroes around there. And so Deadpool's not getting everyone's adoration. Instead, they're celebrating Thor, they're celebrating Captain America, so on and so forth. And so what Deadpool decides to do is kill Thor. It's the most logical thing apparently for Deadpool to do. And so so when Thor's using the bathroom, Deadpool runs up on him, he grabs his hammer, he kills Thor, he basically becomes Deadpool, Venom Thor, and then kills all the superheroes except for the women that he considers to be attractive so that they can admire how attractive he is, and so on. The problem with this is that he's basically just become a dick. Like, that's what he is. He's basically like, yes, I'm the greatest person in the world, you all should worship me. But it's funny because he's having this conversation with Doc Samson, and Doc Samson's like, no, usually when it comes to something like this, or people say that nobody respects them or they're causing drama or something like that, they usually do things like causing drama because it makes them feel like they're achieving something when they're not. But he also says that the reason why people didn't like you before was because you were a dick. I mean, you could say, sure, like they just didn't respect you because you were a small-time superhero, or you were really more of an anti-hero more than anything else, but it was really just because you were a jerk and no one liked you. And so in response, Deadpool rips off the head of Doc Samson, goes and grabs the retcon expungifier, and like retcons the story out of continuity. That's how Rick Remender ends this. This story essentially doesn't exist in Marvel Comics. Seems to be the case. This story is insane, but I love it. I love the story where Deadpool becomes Venom because it's so ridiculous, because it's so insane. And I think that every once in a while we have to read crazy, insane comics because they help to keep us grounded. It's like sci-fi movies, right? Like sometimes you just gotta sit down and you gotta watch Frankenfish. Not because Frankenfish is a good movie, not because it's anywhere close to what anybody could even consider to be anything remotely near a good movie, but because of the fact that you just need things like that. It's like that with everything, right? I mean, you gotta play games like Call of Duty so you can play the bad and you can appreciate the good. You play Call of Duty and you're like, man, I really like Battlefield. Or if you hate Battlefield and you play Call of Duty, you say, I play Battlefield so I can appreciate Call of Duty. Whatever the case may be, like you gotta have everything in balance, you know? And I love the way this whole thing comes out. But the fact remains, if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. I'm sure there's gonna be a few people who take themselves too seriously and are like, oh, you were laughing in the video and I don't like it. But in any event, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end and I will catch you all later. Peace. Okay, so with Monday being our weekly Hulk video now, I mean, I didn't really intend for it to be this way, but it's kind of turned out that way. We're going to be talking about the Incredible Hulk's wife conquering Earth, and it's actually kind of a cool story. This all goes back to the whole Planet Hulk thing, and that's one of the funny things that we did. We really didn't do a whole lot of like what-if stories when it came to like Planet Hulk, World War Hulk, different things like that. By and large, the most popular what-if story we did for World War Hulk was the Incredible Hulk killing all the superheroes and then becoming Galactus's herald. But that was really about it. I mean, we really didn't do a whole lot of what ifs. What this does is it gives us an alternate take on the original Planet Hulk event. Now, for those of you guys who are new to, the Incredible Hulk in general, you'll find a playlist with some 30 or 40 videos about the Incredible Hulk that just runs through all of his best stories. It's like this great big, 5 or 6 year long story written by a guy named Greg Pak that ran from the original Planet Hulk event all the way up through World War Hulk, the, aftershocks or aftermath rather, and then going up to, a couple of ancillary stories here and there, leading into Secret Wars, and then going into all new, all different Marvel. This one I'm gonna go ahead and throw in there probably after Planet Hulk, to be honest, just because it's a what if story. But Planet Hulk centered on the idea that the Incredible Hulk was just too unpredictable and too violent for the Earth superheroes. And the result was that there was a group called the Illuminati. And the Illuminati were basically this kind of inner circle of Reed Richards, Professor Xavier. It was actually Captain America at one point before his mind was wiped, Doctor Strange. And they basically, Tony Stark, and they basically all just kind of banded together for the purpose of keeping the Earth protected from, external and internal threats. What they ended up doing is they basically shot the Incredible Hulk into space. And the goal was to send him to a peaceful planet where he could basically live out his days without having to worry about threats or anything along those lines and without being a threat to Earth. The problem was he ended up on this planet called Sakaar, which resulted in him basically being turned into a slave and then becoming a gladiator and then all that kind of good stuff. At the end of that Planet Hulk story, he had basically found love with a woman named Kyra, and they actually ended up, starting a family of sorts, or at least she ended up getting pregnant. And in the midst of, rebuilding this empire after the Incredible Hulk had conquered the existing king, the Illuminati ship had basically exploded. It had detonated due to its nuclear core being tampered with and things going awry, which ultimately resulted in the Incredible Hulk's wife, Kyra, basically being killed. This led into World War Hulk when the Incredible Hulk showed up back to Earth and crushed everybody. It was a really cool story. What this does is it gives us an alternate take. It pretty much runs over everything that we just talked about a second ago. The difference here is that in the moment when this ship began to go awry and began to detonate, the Incredible Hulk grabbed Kyra and threw her out of the blast zone Zone and ended up being killed himself in the process. Now, there are a couple of things that Marvel does here that we just kind of have to take with a grain of salt. The Incredible Hulk being killed in a nuclear explosion, for example. Under normal circumstances, the Incredible Hulk would never be killed in a nuclear blast. He's too durable, he's too powerful, he's too strong. That would never happen. He'd probably be injured, but he would never be killed in a nuclear explosion. He'd withstand it, and then he would just kind of keep on keeping on. And in fact, that's where we got Maestro Hulk from, when the world, basically collapsed into nuclear war, and Maestro Hulk emerged with Bruce Banner kind of being driven insane by all this irradiation, and then, kind of conquering what was left of humanity, and then just crowning himself king. The other half of this is that with Kyra effectively surviving, she basically bonds herself with the entirety of the old power. Now, the old power was this concept created by Greg Pak for the purpose of just offering an explanation as to how it was that Kyra was able to do the things she was, as well as setting the groundwork for the introduction of the Incredible Hulk's son, Scar. Now, we talked about the old power in our videos on Greg Pak's whole run, Planet Hulk, World War Hulk, all that kind of good stuff. But the old power is basically this energy of sorts that was sort of either created or tapped into by a group of individuals and was designed to basically counter the power cosmic of Galactus. The problem with this was that only certain people could actually access it, individuals who were considered to be the old strong. And the result was that when they did, it basically amplified whatever existing power they had. And then those who had to manipulate it or knew how to manipulate it effectively could actually make themselves almost on par with Galactus in terms of their abilities. That's what we saw with the Incredible Hulk's second son, Hero Kala, the things that he was able to do, the kind of stunts he was able to pull off. With regards to this particular story, Kyra actually absorbs the entirety of the old power from within the planet of Sakaar itself, and then in turn, intends to travel back to Earth. Now, one thing to keep in mind, she's not on par with Galactus in this particular level of strength, but she's well beyond all the other Earth's superheroes. And the way this plays out is that she basically arrives, or at least the first place she conquers, is the moon. Now, again, those of you guys who saw our videos on World War Hulk or who are watching Comic Historians videos on World War Hulk, this follows almost directly in line with the events as they unfolded there in terms of the steps that were taken. But there's a few differences here. The first is that the Incredible Hulk did arrive on the moon. The reason why was because of the fact that the Inhumans had long since resided on the moon. They had basically left Earth during the events of Inhumans Volume 2, I think it was, and they'd basically been on the moon ever since. But the idea here was that the Incredible Hulk had stopped at the moon first because Black Bolt, the king of the Inhumans, was one of the Illuminati, one of the people who banished him. And the result was that, the Incredible Hulk basically conquered Black Bolt. With this, we don't see that happen. We don't see that take place. Another difference here is the Sentry, Robert Reynolds. In the original World War Hulk story, the Sentry and the Incredible Hulk just basically beat the crap out of one another. And it was actually really, really cool to see. The Sentry was like this one guy who could stand against the Incredible Hulk, really the only one who was able to pull it off. But what ends up happening here is that because of the fact that Kyra basically attacks the Inhumans, and in doing so just blows off a massive chunk of the moon, it catches the attention of the Earth superheroes before she ever arrives. Now, of course, she ends up tapping into the satellites that orbit the Earth and then broadcasts a message telling the Illuminati that they're all going to die, that the Earth superheroes are all going to be killed because they're the reason why the Incredible Hulk was banished in the first place. But in their attempt to try to get to her before she arrives to New York, we end up finding out that she has Black Bolt in tow. Now, this is one of the other things that kind of requires us to not really stress the limits of credulity, but to sort of, modify how we normally see Black Bolt, because Black Bolt's powers have waxed and waned over the years. For those of you guys who don't know, Black Bolt has, super strength, speed, so on and so forth, but his most formidable power is a quasi-sonic scream. And what it means is that if he tries to talk, he'll destroy whatever's in his path. Now, there's been stories where he's been powerful enough to shatter planets. There's been stories like House of M, with just a whisper, he was almost infinitely more powerful than he was in the mainline Marvel universe. In this particular story, it seems like it's really hitting back to the power that he had during House of M. And the reason we know that is because of the fact that as soon as Kyra grabs him, she immediately tells him to basically speak. Now, of course, under normal circumstances, Black Bolt would never do this. But remember, back when the Incredible Hulk was on Sakaar, one of the reasons why he was forced into servitude as a gladiator is because he had been bonded with an obedience disc. And while the obedience disc didn't modify his mind, what it did do is it sent a series of electric currents through whoever the disc was bonded to until they did what they were told. It was just basically a way to force control. And the result is that when Kyra activates this obedience disc, Black Bolt simply says no and then obliterates the Sentry and Doctor Strange. Now, Doctor Strange, we could easily see him being destroyed, especially if he doesn't have time to cast a spell to protect protect him from Black Bolt's quasi-sonic scream. The Sentry is a little more questionable here. It's one of those things where it's kind of like, I don't really know if Black Bolt would be able to destroy the Sentry, but it's still kind of a cool thing. It's still kind of a cool little bit of a story here. But following this is where things begin to differ. Because remember, when the Incredible Hulk showed up in New York during the events of World War Hulk, it was really one of those just capture everybody, capture the members of the Illuminati, and then we're going to force them to fight in the gladiatorial games. Kyra does not have the same restraint as the Incredible Hulk. And this makes sense because remember, the Incredible Hulk fought alongside almost all these superheroes at some point or another over the course of his life as a hero. He's fought alongside the Avengers, he's fought alongside the X-Men, he's fought alongside the Fantastic Four, he's also fought against them as well. But whether they were enemies or whether they were friends, there's a kind of camaraderie that existed between all of them. With this particular story, Kyra does not have that camaraderie. In her mind, they're bad guys. They're the reason why her husband's dead, and they're all going to die. And that's exactly what she does. She literally takes to almost all the Earth's superheroes. Iron Man is killed. Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four is killed. All these guys are basically taken out. Now remember, with her having the old power, she's able to manipulate the very forces of the Earth itself, in addition to amplifying her own power. So not only are the Earth superheroes fighting against Kyra, they're also fighting against the planet that they live on. Now, the way that things begin to shift is, in truth, it would have been very easy for her to obliterate the entirety of the Earth superheroes for the most part, because the power she possesses is well beyond anything they have. But in this moment, she's basically told that would be foolish. It would be stupid to kill the entirety of the Earth superheroes, because then what are you going to rule? Are you going to rule a cinder? You're going to rule a giant uninhabited planet? There's not going to be anything here for you to have any possession of. And so the result is that she actually ends up backing off, and we jump forward about 21 years later, only for us to find out that she had basically bonded the entirety of the Earth superhero community with obedience discs, and these include people like Colossus, She-Hulk, so on and so forth. But the other thing that we're also sort of given here is this idea that the whole of humanity have been bonded with these obedience discs. Now, we don't know for sure. We're not told that explicitly, but that seems to be the case just because of the fact that there are people here who do not have powers that have been bonded with obedience discs. Now, the other half of this is we also have to imagine that in this conflict, various superheroes have probably been killed. I mean, the city of New York is in the process of being rebuilt, but we also find out that this massive monument is being constructed. Now, of course, this comes directly from Scar himself. Now, remember, in the Incredible Hulk line of stories in the mainline Marvel Comics, Scar had basically survived this nuclear explosion after he was released by his mother and then preserved using the power of the Old Strong in order to keep him encased in this kind of molten cocoon. And the result was that he emerged, he eventually made his escape from Sakaar, and then showed up on Earth to battle his father, whom he considered to be someone that just kind of abandoned him or left him behind. In this story, that's not the case. Kyra was of course pregnant with him, but presumably gave birth on Earth to him, and then in turn raised him in her own image. But of course, we end up finding out this massive structure that's being built is designed explicitly to basically pay homage to the Incredible Hulk. Not only that, with his hand being outstretched, we end up finding out that this is basically Kyra's testament to him in the sense that she leaves the entirety of Earth in control of her son Scar, and then just sort of joins the statue of Bruce Banner, effectively giving up her power and sacrificing her life in the process. So again, it's kind of a weird situation. It's a little strange in terms of how this unfolds, but it's also sort of cool because this shows us the lengths that the Incredible Hulk's wife would go to in order to basically avenge her husband's death. And with the power that she possessed, it was enough to effectively conquer the entirety of the Earth, take over all these different superheroes and supervillains, kill those that rebelled, and then make the place her own. So again, it's a pretty cool story, and it's pretty interesting in terms of how it unfolds. But yeah, I thought it'd be kind of fun to just sort of throw this what if story out there and just say, hey, here's a really cool story with the Incredible Hulk. We've covered mostly origin videos so far. We'll probably end up doing Hulk 2099 at some point. But the idea is to just kind of run through these different little Incredible Hulk things that a lot of people have been asking for since we originally did Planet Hulk, World War Hulk, and all that kind of stuff. But if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. And yeah, I mean, not too bad for, like a 13-page story. It's not that long. It's actually from Planet Hulk What If, which has like 3 or 4 different stories all combined into one. There's one story where it's like, what if Bruce Banner had landed on Sakaar instead of the Incredible Hulk? What if the Incredible Hulk had landed on the planet that he was supposed to, where it was peaceful? It's kind of cool because he eventually becomes a god. But nonetheless, it's one of these interesting concepts. But anyway, guys, we're going to go ahead and bring this video to an end, and I will catch you all later. Peace. So for this week's What If story, I figured we'd do the story of what if the Sentry killed the Marvel Universe. Now, this actually comes out as a what if story as a counterpart to Siege, which is actually issue number 200. It's actually pretty cool. But for those of you guys who don't know, I've done a video on Siege, which you'll find down in the description. But the basis of this was really like the conclusion of everything that had come after Civil War. I mean, we had the Superhuman Registration Act, we had Secret Invasion, we had Dark Reign, where Norman Osborn had replaced Tony Stark as director of S.H.I.E.L.D., and Norman Osborn had looked to basically take over the world. The idea of Siege brought all these things to an end. So it saw the disbanding of the Superhuman Registration Act, it saw the defeat of Norman Osborn, it saw the death of Robert Reynolds in the original story, the death of the Sentry. This what if story takes a different approach. So during Dark Reign, Norman Osborn had basically replaced the Avengers with villains, because for a lot of people out there, they knew about the identity of some of the heroes, but they didn't know all of them. And so, for example, Hawkeye was basically replaced with Bullseye. Norman Osborn himself took over the role of Iron Man, operating under the role of, or under the name of Iron Patriot with the Iron Man armor. We had a multitude of heroes who were essentially just replaced with villains, and then Osborn used them as a way to effectively solidify his reign. Now, we also had groups like the X-Men, which were basically outliers in the sense that Norman Osborn's control at the time was really isolated to the continental United States. And so for the X-Men, they effectively left the continental United States. They formed their own society in a place called Utopia off the coast of San Francisco, and they operated outside of Norman Osborn's control. And so because of this, they were able to basically try to thwart his efforts as best they could, but there really wasn't a whole lot that they could do, because remember, this is a point in the history of the X-Men where the mutant population has been reduced by 98%. So there's only a very small portion of them left who can effectively fight against Osborn. And so during the original Siege event, Asgard, as it existed in Oklahoma, was really like the last bastion of Norman Osborn solidifying his rule and then taking the steps to essentially take over the government and make himself dictator. And so because of this, he had basically brought along a lot of his ilk, his cabal, and led a campaign to take over Asgard. Now the kicker to this was that you still had Thor, you still had a lot of heroes who were there, you had Loki, who was kind of the hidden hand behind it all. But the idea here was that Osborn had gone against the forces of Asgard, and he'd gone against, you know, the Avengers under Captain America when they had realized what was going on, and they basically rallied to the call. And so Norman Osborn was essentially defeated here. In this story, we take a different approach. In the original Siege event, or I guess in the events of Dark Reign, really the events that led up to Siege, Norman Osborn had essentially had the Sentry's wife Lindy killed by Bullseye, and then he had used the emotional state of Robert Reynolds to manipulate him into following the ideologies of Norman Osborn, hence having one of the most powerful beings in existence on his side. With this particular story, instead of fighting Ares, the god of war, on the battlefield during the Siege of Asgard, instead, Robert Reynolds had fought him several days beforehand. And what this meant was that instead of like the original Siege on Asgard story, where Robert Reynolds was basically exhausted after fighting Ares, in this story, he's fully energized. He's lost virtually none of his power. And because of this, he's quite literally a one-man army. I mean, Robert Reynolds goes through, he kills Luke Cage by punching a hole in him. He kills Thor. Like he cuts off the head of Captain America. And it was actually really, really messed up. It was funny. It's not funny. That's not funny that Captain America's head got cut off. That's it is funny because like Scarlet, or not Scarlet Spider, Spider-Woman Jessica Drew is like, no. It's hilarious to me. But the idea here is that Robert Reynolds allowed for Norman Osborn's villains to effectively go through and start killing off what was left of the superheroes. Because you got to keep in mind, Captain America, despite not having any real superpowers per se, is like a moral rallying point for all of the superheroes. I mean, they looked to Steve Rogers as the one guy that was solidified in Brian Michael Bendis' Age of Ultron. When everything had come crashing down, all the superheroes were waiting on Steve Rogers to formulate a plan. That's literally what they were waiting on. They were waiting on him to get his act together to figure out what to do next. They ultimately settled on traveling to one of Nick Fury's bunkers when he was still alive, but the idea was, you know, during Age of Ultron, it was established that Captain America was the rallying guy, and it had always been that way. That story just kind of solidified it as being an absolute truth. But with him being killed here, the superheroes haven't really lost their will to fight so much as they've lost any real measure of organization. And so again, we have the Avengers coming in, much like we did before. We have Iron Man, we have, you know, Wolverine, you know, we have the X-Men, Cyclops, we have them coming in. Of course, the X-Men, you know, again, didn't play a major major role in the original events of Siege, but they're showing up here. But it doesn't matter because they're all being defeated by, Robert Reynolds and by these various heroes. And so the way things begin to differentiate is Emma Frost effectively has to watch as Cyclops died. But during this process, Dr. Doom arrives. Dr. Doom steps in and says, hey, we got to get out of here. Like, I have magic that's basically hiding our existence here, but it won't be long before this magic wears off. They realize that we're here and then they kill us. So we've got to bail out because I have a plan. And so she ends up going with Dr. Doom and they arrive back at Utopia. Now again, Utopia is this area where the X-Men are basically operating out of, but there's only a handful of them left now from those who had originally been killed. And so, when the question is, what's your plan? What goal do you have here? We're suddenly met by the arrival of Loki. And Loki is the one that says, hey, I have a plan. I'm the one that has this idea on how we're going to fix everything. And so at this point, we really just kind of have Norman Osborn in the background solidifying his reign in the sense that he informs Carla and he informs Mac, a couple of his henchmen, to basically go and kill the president of the United States, thereby allowing Norman Osborn to solidify himself as absolute ruler of the world. We also have, Bullseye trying to be dealt with by some of these other heroes as well, but it's really just this attempt by them to eliminate as many of Norman Osborn's heroes as they can before they end up getting into Robert Reynolds. Now, following this, Robert Reynolds is actually brought to them by Loki, and this was the plan of Loki himself. His plan was to basically go to Reynolds and to say, hey, Bullseye was the one that killed your wife. Norman Osborn was the one who instructed him to do it. Now, initially, he doesn't believe them, but Emma Frost says, hey, let me use my powers, let me go into your mind, and I'll show you what it is that had happened. And when he sees what took place, he immediately kills her. And the reason why he does this is because Robert Reynolds transforms into the Void. Now, this is a great time to have that conversation because I've seen so many people ask that. I saw in the Siege comments, or the Siege video, people were asking in the comments section, is the Void more powerful than Robert Reynolds? Yes. Robert Reynolds, it's really kind of like his powers are sort of a mishmash. There are some that say that he has the ability to warp reality, and that's kind of been confirmed to a degree in Marvel Comics. There are some that say he's just super powerful, and his power is whatever the writers need him to do at any one particular point in time. Like, that is just what his power is. He has powers of convenience. But the idea here is that Robert Reynolds always has like a moral compass. He always keeps the Void in check. The Void is all the anger and all the hate of Robert Reynolds manifested into a physical being, and it's unbridled power. I mean, just unbridled, untapped, uncontrollable power in the most extreme. And so it's literally just a force of nature is the best way to describe the Void. It is, and it's an insane reckoning. And we see this because the Void literally kills everyone. It kills Dr. Doom. Now, the death of Dr. Doom, which Dr. Doom always seems to die in stories like this, but the death of Dr. Doom is so cool because, the Void says, hey, look, if you want to beg, you can beg. And Dr. Doom says, nope, I don't beg. And so Void says, okay, fine, and just kills him off. No questions, no nothing. Kills off one of the most powerful mystics, one of the most powerful beings in existence. After that, he turns his attention to Norman Osborn and kills Norman Osborn. And so from here, it's basically, humanity launching its weapons, its weapons of war, its bombs and so on against the Void with no effort whatsoever, nothing happening out of this. And after this, the Void basically begins going through and killing all those heroes that just didn't show up at the siege on Asgard. It kills all these beings that just simply didn't make it to that event for whatever reason. And so what we learn is that this entire series of events is actually being watched by a member of the Watcher named Atau. Now, this is actually a deviation from the status quo. In Marvel Comics, all the what-if stories are basically told to us from Uatu the Watcher. And the reason why was established again in the original Sin story when Uatu the Watcher had access to see all the other universes that exist out there. And so it was like we were watching it through the eyes of the Watcher as he was looking at a viewing screen. But what happens is this is actually another guy named Atau who's relaying these events to Uatu the Watcher. And the implication here is that not only does the Void go through and wipe out all life on Earth and destroy the Earth itself, it also seems like the Void is going to eventually destroy the moon and then make its way through the entirety of the universe, killing everything off. Now the question is, could the Void do that? Yes, the Void could easily go through and kill the cosmic entities, kill the Celestials, kill Galactus, because remember, the Void's power is limitless. There's nothing the Void can't do. And so any foe that goes against the Void will have enough power to kill that foe every single time across the board without fail. This is why the character of the Sentry is so derisive in Marvel Comics. And this is, because he's really just kind of like a trump card. Like Sentry enters the fray and then whatever side he's on wins. But it's also the other reason why the Sentry in the comics had always tried to keep the Void at bay, because if the Void were to go unleashed like it it did here, then it would just lead to the destruction of everything. This is really just showing us what happens when the Void, when the Sentry basically lets his guard down and allows the Void to completely take over, and you know what the ramifications would be for a situation like that. It's just the Void wiping out all things in existence. But if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the subscribe button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, drop a like and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think about the Sentry Robert Reynolds. Let me know how you guys feel about him, because I know he's really popular, but really hardcore comic book fans hate him, but people who are casual fans think he's interesting. So I'm kind of curious to see what side of the field you guys take on this. I like him. I think he's a cool character. I think that he was kind of misused in the New Avengers run when he was folded over. I think his best stories came out of Marvel Knights, but you know, I think that he's still a pretty reasonable character, still decent. I mean, he's dead now. For those of you guys who don't know, by the way, I want to go ahead and bring this up too. For those of you guys who don't know, the Sentry dying in Siege was the last time he officially appeared in Marvel Comics. He was kind of resurrected as one of the Four Horsemen, I think as part of the Apocalypse Twins, but that wasn't really like the Sentry as we knew him. The Sentry as we knew him is essentially gone. The old school Sentry appeared in the Contest of Champions, I think, but that doesn't count. Like the Sentry as we know him is gone. He's never been seen or heard from again. He may come back, but I don't think he will. I think the Sentry is just kind of gone. He was a difficult character to work with anyway. It was difficult to write stories for him because he suffered from the Superman complex, but the fact remains, you know, that we may or may not see him at some future point in time. But with that being said, we're gonna bring this video to an end, and I will catch you all later. Peace. So as we continue our discussion surrounding, you know, Wolverine related content in response to the trailer for Logan having been released, what I want to do here is I want to talk about how Wolverine killed all the supervillains. Now, this actually comes to us as issue 111 of the What If line of stories. Now, for those of you guys who know about What If, bear with me for a second while I run over this for those who don't. If you're coming from DC Comics, the What If line of publications are similar to what you call Elseworlds. The difference here is that Elseworlds are just stories that are out there. They don't usually tie into the existing continuity. The What If stories in Marvel Comics do. So it's like, what if, you know, Wolverine had killed the Incredible Hulk? When the two of them first met, when Wolverine first appeared in Marvel Comics, it was in a battle with the Incredible Hulk. The What If story is based on what if Wolverine had killed the Incredible Hulk in that battle, then how would the conflict turn out, or how would the world turn out? There's stories like, what if Aunt May had died instead of Uncle Ben? There are some really cool stories like that, but they always have their roots in the main continuity. And for those of you guys who are not coming from DC Comics and are just, you know, kind of curious about Marvel in and of itself, the same idea still applies, that Marvel has one straight universe, which is called the Earth 616 continuity, and all the What If stories are just alternate realities that branch off of that. Now, this particular story actually has its roots in Wolverine becoming a Horseman of Apocalypse. Now, the way this worked was that in the mid-1990s, comic books had just been struggling in general, and so the goal was to try to reinvigorate them and keep them interesting. But at the same time, Wolverine had lost his adamantium in a battle with Magneto during the events of Fatal Attractions, which I actually have a video on. But because of this, Wolverine was effectively sent off into the wild, where he became what's called Feral Wolverine. And his comics actually lasted this way for quite some time. The issue with this was that it wasn't a story that could be done forever. Marvel eventually had to find a way to bring him back, to make him into the Wolverine that we always knew. And so what they did is they basically initiated a story where the villain Apocalypse had kidnapped Wolverine and Sabretooth and basically said, whichever one of you wins in a battle to the death will not only, you know, become my Horseman War, but will also receive enhancements. And so because Wolverine was still relatively feral at this point, because he was a far more capable fighter than Sabretooth was, he ultimately killed Sabretooth. And in doing so, Apocalypse restored his adamantium to his bones and made Wolverine into the Horseman War. Now, in that original story, Wolverine's brainwashing was basically worn off by a combination of Jubilee and the rest of the X-Men, who were able to talk him down and bring him back. In this story, that didn't happen. Instead, Wolverine remained the Horseman War. And so what we do here is we initially pick up with a group called the War Watch. And the War Watch basically just functions to ensure that the world stays safe. And this is actually one of the really cool concepts here, because in this, you know, in this future, there is no war between humans and mutants. The humans and mutants are basically living in peace. That Xavier's dream of a peaceful coexistence between humans and mutants mutants has actually come to fruition. In addition to this, we also see that this, what seems to be this fledgling group of young officers are brought in at the behest of their sergeant, and they're basically told that there is a group calling themselves the Wolf Pack, who are basically a gang that have been running amok and they've been attacking stores. Now, what this tells us is that in this future, that there is still violence. Violence is very rare, it doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's quickly snuffed out, and that these young people are a combination of regular humans and mutants who have come together under the banner of the Wolf Pack and begun engaging in violent acts. And so what ends up happening is the War Watch, of course, bands together. These police go out to the mall, they attack these young people, they basically, they grab them, they throw them, or at least they seem to subdue them with gas, and then they take them, and have them arrested accordingly. The whole question is, how did things get to this point? At what moment did everything seem to change? And what we're told, or at least what we're given, is this sort of quick rundown on the history of Wolverine's life. What we know is that before he joined the X-Men, Wolverine was a part of a group called Alpha Flight as part of Canada's Department K, which was Canada's superhero team. The idea was that as part of Alpha Flight, Wolverine served to carry out government actions and so on and so forth, but eventually his journeys brought him to the attention of the X-Men. Not only that, he had of course received his adamantium upgrades by virtue of the Weapon X program, but in light of all this, when the time came whereby he was made a Horseman of Apocalypse, because the X-Men either didn't come to his aid or didn't arrive fast enough, that immediately after he became the Horseman War, he killed Apocalypse right off the bat. Now, something to point out here is that this is entirely possible. Apocalypse, yes, he has celestial technology, yes, he's wildly powerful, he's one of the most powerful mutants in existence, he can alter his size to virtually anything, but Wolverine having adamantium makes him virtually indestructible. And because there's really no metal that Apocalypse could be in possession of, with the exception of adamantium itself, that could keep him safe from Wolverine, he was easily killed by Wolverine. Now, this is also kind of funny too, because those of you guys who ever watched X-Men the animated series, whenever Wolverine used his claws on Apocalypse, it never worked. That was actually an error. That was a mistake in the show, that his claws should have easily torn through Apocalypse's armor. But the fact remains here that after becoming the Horseman War, he basically embarked on a crusade to kill off every single supervillain he came across. So he killed off the Juggernaut, he killed Pyro, he killed Magneto, he killed them all. He killed Arcade, who was a small-time villain that basically used tricks and things like that. He's like Marvel's version of the Riddler. But the fact remains here that he killed anybody, he was much like the Punisher, he killed anybody who was involved in governmental corruption, who was involved in trafficking. It didn't matter if they were mutants, it didn't matter if they were humans, if they were political officials, if they were your average Joes. He killed every single bad guy, anyone who had ever done anything nefarious in the Marvel Universe. The problem with this was that the heroes also recognized that if allowed to continue unchecked, that Wolverine would basically become a detriment to the world as a whole. And so all the superheroes of the world came together and they began forming their own governments, their own groups and organizations. So the Avengers went against Wolverine, the Inhumans went against Wolverine, the X-Men went against Wolverine, and he killed every single one of them. He killed every last one. And so in response, humanity and what was left of the mutant population banded together and formed a group called War Watch. And War Watch was designed to quite literally keep tabs on what it was that Wolverine was doing and eventually find him and bring him in. The problem was that they were never really successful in doing that, simply because of the fact that if Wolverine doesn't want to be caught, then he won't be caught. And so what this does is this continues along the path of one of these young recruits who goes to the Hudson Bay Watch grounds, which is kind of like the next step in the War Watch. Not only that, he's also become a little bit disillusioned with everything that's going on. And so in his journeys, he actually comes across a monk who seems to be in hiding, or at the very least seems to be just kind of watching all these things unfold. And the idea is to learn from him everything he can. Not only that, this person's operating under the mantle of Brother Xavier. And so the initial idea is maybe this is Charles Xavier. Maybe Charles Xavier was the last surviving guy. In addition to this, what Brother Xavier also does is he gives an account of Wolverine's history and saying that not only, did he turn against various villains, but he also fought people who were allies at one point in time. Again, tying into this element of killing off the various superheroes and the various supervillains that existed. And so in response to this, basically what he did is he recognized the fact that some aspect of his personality, Wolverine was always doomed to be the Horseman War, that all that, becoming the Horseman War did was allow this dark aspect of his persona to completely emerge and allow the humanity of who he was to be cast aside. And so in the end, what we learn is that this person that this young man's been talking to is actually Wolverine himself. In addition to this, once they get, back to normal society, that when the War Watch is still trying to deal with this gang, this wolf pack that's, running amok throughout various cities, that Wolverine actually comes to their aid, and Wolverine is able to stop every single one of these kids. Not only that, this guy, some of these people also recognize that it seems to be Wolverine himself. And so once this meeting between the two is completed, once this young man officially allows himself to be inducted into the order of monks, which are part of this war watch, once he's become kind of a leader, so to speak, that Wolverine officially reveals who he is and tells him that the goal is to always keep conflict at bay, the goal is to always keep battle at bay, and that it's a never-ending fight in order to achieve this goal. Having said that, I don't know if you guys feel like I do, but this is one of the worst written stories that I've ever seen in the history of my life. This is so badly written, it's not even funny. But it is still an interesting concept with Wolverine taking on the entirety of the superhero and the supervillain community. But because I don't like to focus on the negative, we're going to bring this to an end. But post down in the comments, let me know. Try to be nice to each other, guys. Try to be civil. Post a comment down below and let me know what you guys think about this story, whether you thought it was good, whether you thought it was bad, what you thought the case may be. And if you're new here to Comics Explained, make sure you hit the sub button, become part of the Rob Corps. You may or may not get a shiny new ring. And yeah, make sure you guys drop a like, and I will catch you guys later. Peace. All right, so one of the big questions that I've had, and this is probably a video I'm going to release before we really jump into Christmas, but one of the big requests that I've had is to make a video with Dakin related content. At least I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it. I'm pretty sure it's Dakin. Maybe it's Dakin, I don't know. I was half inclined to call him Steve. Oh, that'd be an amazing title for a video. Steve, the son of Wolverine. Wolverine had a son named Steve. It's like, yeah, man, he's just a tax guy. That's all he does is just do taxes. He didn't really have anything special going on. He's just kind of just hanging out. And then he screwed up Wolverine's taxes one day, so we killed him. But in any event, I've been getting that request a lot. A lot of people really like the character of Dakin. Now, Dakin, as you guys know him, was really kind of fleshed out in Daniel Way's run of Wolverine Origins, which is this 50-issue run that just covers all these missing memories of Wolverine's life, as well as Original Sin and subsequent stories that came around during that time. But he was originally introduced under Jeff Loeb in Wolverine Volume 3, issue number 54, I think. I'm not going to swear to that, but I'm pretty sure it's the case, somewhere around there, somewhere along those lines. But instead of jumping into a whole volume of Wolverine and covering all these things that lead up to the introduction of Dakin, only to turn around and see a flop because nobody really cares, what I instead wanted to do here was basically go through and do the what if story where Wolverine killed his son. Now, what this does is this basically kind of wraps around into the early days of his life, and it turns history on its head a little bit. And what I mean here is this story was written by a guy named Rob Williams. Now, as far as I know, Rob Williams really just kind of delved into independent comics. He really did a lot of indie stuff, and he's only really done a handful of Marvel comics, and I think right now he's working with DC and Vertigo. But the idea here was that when Dakin's backstory was slowly revealed over the course of a series of publications, it had been established that his birth came by way of a massacre, to be honest. The Winter Soldier, Bucky Barnes, had basically been sent to kill the pregnant wife of Wolverine. He succeeded in doing that while Wolverine was gone, and then Dakin was basically taken from the corpse of his mother and then dropped off at a wealthy family's house. And that was really kind of the earliest days of Dakin. That's how he kind of grew into that. What this story does is it says that didn't happen. Instead, Wolverine basically came home while Itsu was being attacked. She did die, but then he absolutely slaughtered Bucky Barnes. This is kind of a crazy situation because Rob Williams in his writing, it's kind of weird. I wouldn't say it's continuity errors so much that because this is a what if story, this is not the same set of events. So what I mean here is, for those of you guys who are new to Marvel Comics, what ifs are usually an alternate reality. DC has Elseworlds where it's just here's a story where Batman and the Justice League become Green Lanterns, but they're not tied into the main DC continuity. It's not like the Ring of Abin-Sur went to Bruce Wayne instead of Hal Jordan, and that's the continuity. It happens that way, but it's not tied into things. With Marvel's What If, they tied into the main continuity. So they say, well, things progress normally, and then, this event happened. And that seems to be what happens here. But the idea of Wolverine killing Bucky Barnes is kind of a big deal because Wolverine fought alongside Steve Rogers, Captain America, in World War II. He fought alongside Bucky Barnes as well. And so he's basically killing an ally that he fought with during World War II. The problem with this is that for Wolverine, it's pretty easy to distance himself from the idea of I'm killing a friend, because this is after the supposed death of Bucky Barnes when he was taken by the Russians and transformed into the assassin known as the Winter Soldier. So because of this, the memories that he had of his former life are essentially gone. Not only that, Bucky Barnes had never really faced an enemy like Wolverine before, and that's prevalent in this story when he's just you're not supposed to be here, and he's terrified for his life because Wolverine is a guy that after his claws first popped, after he took off from his family and he basically tried to live a peaceful life, it was one one of these things where he just wanted to stay out of the public eye. He was like the Hulk. He just wanted to be left alone. He wanted a peaceful life. But woe betide the poor soul that came along and screwed that up. And that's what happened with Bucky Barnes. He took the wrong contract. And the result is that Wolverine basically decapitates him. Now from here, the tough thing for Logan is that he literally has to cut his wife open and take Daken out. And that's where things start to differentiate, because in the main stories, and again, I'm not going to get too deep into this on the off chance that this video is stupidly popular and people want me to do Daken, but essentially the story unfolded in a different way to where an enigmatic being basically came along. Some guy that we didn't know who it was at first came along and took Daken out of his mother's body and then dropped him off at a family. And so with Wolverine taking him, for him, this is a crushing experience for Logan. And this changes everything about his character. I mean, this will impact his role in the X-Men, the whole 9 yards, because now he's basically a father. And that was really Daniel Way's emphasis. When he said, okay, let's focus more on Daken, let's flesh his character out, almost the entirety of Wolverine Origins was this idea of Wolverine basically reflecting on the history of his life. And then I think by issue number 10, Daken popped up and he was like, oh my God, I'm a father. And he had to basically change his ways. And that's what happens here. He looks back at his life, a life of violence, basically living for the enjoyment of it. Sure, he killed people, but he also wanted a peaceful life. But it was the idea that Wolverine could afford to be selfish. He was, for all intents and purposes, immortal. And so he knew in the back of his head, even if he didn't want to acknowledge it, that if Itsu had a child and the two of them raised it, a time would come that if that child did not inherit his healing factor, he would outlive both his wife and his son. But for Wolverine, that wasn't the issue. It was he just wants to have a normal life. He just wants to have a family. He wants to be as human as he possibly can. But looking at this child, he basically sits down and says, I can't just live for myself anymore. It can't just be me anymore. Now I've got someone that looks up to me. I effectively have to cast off my old ways, and I literally just need to run to the furthest corners of the world. And that's what they do. They run to Tibet. I mean, they run to the third of the world, and they essentially just kind of hide out there. Now, the reason why Tibet was chosen is because it's such a difficult place to get to. I mean, you've got to get through the Himalayas, assuming you can survive the experience, and then you've got to find your way to where it is that they are in Tibet. And so because of the fact that it's so isolated and so hidden, the likelihood of anybody who had grudges with Wolverine, Lady Deathstrike, any of those characters, Nuke, Sabretooth, the likelihood of any of them finding Wolverine is slim to none. And so during this time, he basically raises his son as best he can. He teaches him prayer. He teaches him the humble nature of life. He teaches him to respect life, to respect the value of all living things, to very much be at home with himself. The problem with this is that Wolverine is effectively ignoring what it was that made him who he was. And this is why Rob Williams' writing is so good, is because it begs the question, is the violent nature of Wolverine just a part of who he is? Is it just his nature to be violent? There's a really, really good parable that I heard once called The Scorpion and the Frog. And any of you guys who have heard this, bear with me for a second because a lot of people haven't, but it really represents these opposing dichotomies of Wolverine's desire for peace and Wolverine's inherent violence. The parable goes like this. One day, there was a scorpion sitting on the side of a riverbank one day, and it was trying to figure out how to get across. And a frog happened by. And the scorpion said, frog, let me climb on your back and you can set across the river and you can drop me off on the other side. And the frog said, no. If I do that, you'll sting me and I'll drown. And the scorpion said, well, why would I do that? If I did that, then we would both drown. And the frog thought about it for a minute, and the frog said, well, that's a really good point. Yeah, okay, that's cool. So the scorpion climbs on the frog's back, and the frog sets off. Well, halfway across the river, the scorpion's tail rears up and stings the frog. And while the frog's veins are filling up with venom, it looks back at the scorpion and it said, why did you sting me? Now we'll both drown. And the scorpion said, I can't help it. It's in my nature. And that's the crazy thing about the story, is because it's essentially this example where Wolverine's violent nature is who he is. It's a fundamental part of who he is. To ignore that, to try to put it in a box and hide it away in a closet, means that he's not recognizing the warning signs initially that his son may be moving in that direction. Now, by the time he begins to pick these up, it's too late. And the way that we learn that is they're tending to their farm. There's of course a goat that they're going to take care of and so on and so forth. But when Wolverine goes inside, he asks his son, he says, what happened to the goat? And he says, well, it seems like a predator got to it. And that's when Wolverine begins to realize that his son Daken is moving towards this direction of being such a violent individual, basically following the same path that Wolverine himself followed when he was younger. Now from here, we transition to the introduction of Charles Xavier. And so this is Rob Williams saying, hey, even if I don't give you a definitive chronology of when these events take place in terms of what's going on in the outside world, here's some measure of how things take place. And so it works out really well because the story is supposed to be isolated. I mean, in truth, this whole first half is supposed to be removed from all the events that are going on. And so we're not supposed to have this tried and true understanding of when this chronology takes place. But when Xavier shows up, of course, Wolverine's like, oh my God, there's somebody here, because his first thoughts flash back to Weapon X, all that kind of good stuff. And so he says, you got to go, get out of here. You got to go. And Charles Xavier essentially offers him a chance to become part of the X-Men. Now, as we know, with regards to the history of the X-Men and my explanation on the X-Men team and so on and so forth, forth, which I need to get back into character and team explanations. But when Charles Xavier showed up, this was after the original X-Men of Iceman and Beast, Archangel, Jean Grey, and Cyclops had been taken prisoner by the living island of Krakoa. And so this is essentially Xavier assembling a new team with Colossus, Nightcrawler, the whole nine yards, in order to rescue the original X-Men team, which is where that X-Men title under Chris Claremont began to grow from. But unlike the main Earth 616 continuity, where Wolverine says, okay, yeah, sure, I'll join that, instead, he's like, get out of here, go away. I do not want the outside world interfering. Now, the crazy thing about this is his son, of course, asks him, says, who was that man? What's going on? Wolverine muses to himself. He says, well, maybe I should have told him it's a man from another life. Maybe I should have told him it's a guy from the outside world that leads a school where he wants to raise people that have abilities to make sure their abilities are used adequately. This is really Wolverine with an extreme amount of hubris, because instead of sitting down and saying, well, maybe this guy Charles Xavier knows what he's talking about. Maybe the Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters, maybe that's a place that Daken needs to go to, because maybe being among his own peers will help him to better understand his own role. If there's a yin and a yang, if he's not around people that don't have healing factors and that don't have advanced combat skills and that don't have claws, then it gives him this sort of false sense of how strong he is. But if he is around people that are just as capable as he is, that could simply just shut down his mind instead of fighting, then it helps him to understand his place, because this is really what Daken is experiencing right now. Like all teenagers, all of us growing up, we're trying to understand where we reside in this hierarchy of this social food chain. We're trying to figure out if we're alpha males, beta males. We're trying to figure out if we're alpha females, beta females. We're trying to figure out where we stand when it comes to our place in the bigger picture. But Daken has no real challengers. It's almost like he's a predator in a world of prey. And so because of this, when we pick up 2 years later and he ends up in a monastery, yes, they're formidable in their own right. He's told, by the other kids around there, they're extremely capable in terms of fighting, but Daken doesn't take any of them seriously because he has claws, because he has a healing factor. He could kill every last one of these guys, no questions asked. He might sustain a few bruises, but his healing factor will take care of all that. And so there's no counterbalance here. There's no one to challenge his superiority. And so it's grown to the point where he has a very superior sense of self. Now, this comes to a head when he begins talking to a woman named Indira. Now, there's another kid that steps up, and this kid, Dorji, I think is how you pronounce it. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce that right. But he basically says, no, Indira, you do not have to kowtow to this guy. You don't have to do whatever it is that he wants you to do. We'll keep you protected. And so what happens is Daken challenges this dude. And of course, we end up picking up with this kind of montage where Rob Williams bounces back and forth, where Wolverine takes off for a time and he tells his son, you're not to leave the property, you're to tend the land, do your chores. If I find out you've done anything other, there's going to be hell to pay when I get back. But we also learned that during this fight, really Daken had beat this kid within an inch of his life. Not only that, he had dished out some severe physical injuries in terms of cuts and so on and so forth. Now, this is Rob Williams unofficially telling us Daken has the use of his claws, because up until this point, we didn't really know. I mean, we didn't know if those had manifested at all. And it's kind of cool that it happens behind the scenes. It's also kind of interesting the first use of his claws here are in a very violent conflict, at least as far as we know. But because of all this, people are terrified of him. People are horrified of him. And this comes to fruition when, we really have Daken just kind of hanging out on the side of a mountain. And then Indira comes to see him and says, everybody wants you guys to leave. They're terrified of you. They're horrified of you. They see you as a violent, insane, psychopathic animal, and they're afraid you're going to kill everyone. And so the only way for them to cope with that is to ask you to leave. And so, he initially says, I don't really want to, but in the midst of their discussion, they're suddenly met with the arrival of Sabretooth. Now, again, Sabretooth in this story is just as much a physical as a metaphorical representation of Wolverine's sins coming back to haunt him. And the reason why I say that is because Sabretooth being a physical presence has always been a part of Wolverine's life for as long as he can remember, going back to his time as Team X, so on and so forth. Not only that, Sabretooth is just pure bloodlust. I mean, Sabretooth just loves killing people. He has no real connection with his own humanity, and so he has no real connection with anybody else's humanity. And because of this, of course, the first thing he does is cast Indira aside and send her flying off the side of the mountain to her death. But then he turns and looks to Daken and says, I'm trying to get Wolverine, but I can smell him on you. I can tell you are his offspring. And so he says the best way to get to him is to get to you. Now, Daken fights off as best he can, and he's actually pretty impressive here. It's actually pretty cool to see him hold his own to a degree against Sabretooth, but what he's doing is he's basically fighting experience. He's fighting a guy that has a vast amount of experience in all forms of combat. And so try as he might, he's really got nothing against Sabretooth, which of course leads to the return of Wolverine, who steps in. Now, again, this is really kind of a funny situation, but the issue with this is that where Wolverine is successfully able to basically kill Sabretooth, or at least it seems like it here, we basically jump forward a bit to what Daken was doing. Now, Rob Williams does not give us like this in-depth explanation. Instead, he just kind of fast tracks it all. Then he tells us that, following the death of Indira, Daken had basically gone to the monk monastery and slaughtered them all. And this was effectively his downward spiral, because in every story, that's what happens, right? I mean, when you have like a villain, or you have like a villain who is a good guy at some point in time, there's always that Darth Vader effect. You know, there's a point where they stop being a good guy and they start being a bad guy. Sometimes it takes a long time for that transition to happen, but that switch eventually takes place. And this is the switch for Daken. This is where he stops being Anakin and becomes Darth Vader. This is where he stops being the son of, you know, Wolverine and becomes a bad guy. And so because of this, he basically takes off to Tokyo 9 years after all this had happened and forms a criminal empire for himself, to the point where he basically has anything he wanted to. Now, he built this empire through fear, blood, and death, but he was able to build it nonetheless. The problem with this is that once Wolverine finally locates Daken after tracking him down for so long, he says, look, I'm going to offer you the opportunity to stand down. Like, you have to give up here. You have to stop this, come back home with me, live a life of peace. We can leave all this behind us and we can call it a day. What's ironic about this is Wolverine's still not learning. He's still not learning the fact that you just can't run away. You can't run away from your problems. You got to face them head on. Daken is a representation of Wolverine's failures. Daken is a representation of the fact that Wolverine believed he could take his darker nature, put it in a corner, and act like it didn't exist. It's everything that Wolverine about his youth coming back to haunt him. And so because of this, you know, Daken lashes out and Wolverine responds in kind by saying, I brought a Muramasa blade. Now, for those of you guys who are new to Marvel Comics, there are several different aspects, several different weapons that can defeat people who have healing factors. Carbonadium can disrupt healing factors temporarily, but it's really more like putting healing factors in a state of flux so much as turning them off. The Muramasa blade turns off healing factors temporarily. And so when a person is touched by a Muramasa blade, their healing factor essentially stops working for a temporary amount of time, effectively making them human. They can be killed by any normal conventional means. Now, when it comes to people who have healing factors, the caveat is that unless you were to like cut off their head, or unless you were to remove their heart or something like that, do something that would basically keep their body from functioning in a normal capacity, they're always going to come back after the effects of the Muramasa blade wear off. Now, we do not see that to its fruition here. Instead, Rob Williams effectively kind of cuts it off with the idea that Wolverine was forced to kill his son. But this is really Wolverine finally recognizing, it's him finally learning that the mistakes that he made in his life, the things that he screwed up, were an indication of the fact that he was a guy that could never find peace. Wolverine could never live the life that he was hoping for. He wanted a kid, he wanted a life of happiness, he wanted to be left alone, but the mistakes that he made, the things that he'd done, were always going to come back to haunt him. They were always going to be a part of his life. And ultimately, Daken was a representation of the fact that Wolverine, again, cannot have a regular, normal, average life like a human. He was born a killer and he will die a killer. And that's just how his life exists. But if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, leave a comment down below. Let me know whether or not you guys are interested in more Daken stuff, and I will catch you all later. Peace.